We're live. There it goes.
Probably do a little bit. I don't think we need to have a long introduction because maybe people already know you. You come here the second time, but yeah.
I'm guessing the mic is in the computer, so. Right?
Oh, okay.
That's
is that the
wherever it's at in there?
Okay. Is it the live streaming also kicked in?
It's on.
It's on.
We're broadcasting.
Yes. Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you, and welcome to our Britain Nashville Healthcare Analytics. And my name is Christine Lai. And if you like a name tag, there's a table at the entrance. There's like the name tag, and you can write your name because it will be easier for people to know you, and also you can do your networking here. To speak a little bit, how many of you come here the first time? Can you raise your hand? Hey, we do have some coming here the first time. And of course, those that did not raise your hand, you already know us. Yeah. We used to be in that room, in the very first room when you come in on your right, but today they have some activities there, so they given us this room and asked us if it's okay. Of course, okay, this is a bigger room, right? And so, our organization, our meetup, provide a platform for people like you and me and Jason Morgan that we are passionate about healthcare analytics. We're doing most of numbers, learning things in healthcare industry, or you are beginners, or you're a guru, or you are an expert, and at all levels. It is a free to join meetup. No obligation, just come in. We usually meet on the third Tuesday every month, and we'll take a break in the summertime. Otherwise, we'll meet every month from 5:30 to 7:30. And this is the room, and from now on for the next 3 months. Again, we have our guest speaker today, Jason Morgan. He is no stranger to us because he came back the second time. And how many of you came for his first part? This is the second part of his, So the first part, because it is people have a very, very good feedback. They want to have second part. I think we stayed very long that night. I'm so afraid, and my husband called me and said, "Are you coming back? You're coming back?" Yes. So we still have and people just didn't want to leave because Jason make a very, very good teaching to us, and the whole seminar, everybody enjoyed it. So according to the feedback in the survey, people want to have part 2. So this is part 2. And Jason Morgan here, my friend, and he's very supportive of our meetup, and he has come here many times, and he is a guru in healthcare. He started in healthcare industry back to 1995. I cannot believe it. You must join the healthcare very, very, very young. And so he has a lot of experience in data, especially hospital billing. I remember that last time, And so, and today, please enjoy his presentation today. And also, before we start, we want to thank Nashville Technology Council here to give us this room, and also our sponsor, SEO Healthcare in town, and they sponsor our food and drink. And so help yourself to the food and the drink. And I'll leave all the time to Jason. Jason, Tom.
Thank you, Christine. I appreciate it. So you asked the question I was going to ask was, how many people were here for part 1? 3. Okay. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but so this is part 2, and we covered a lot of the sort of soft content in the first part, where we talk about, for those of you who are new to healthcare data or trying to understand it. So we want to tackle some of the later stuff where we talk about the actual nuts and bolts, the data. What are the data elements? What comprises the data? How is it structured and organized? So, so that's what I'm going to jump to in this presentation. But just to sort of get everybody back in the groove where we were at, and For those of you who weren't part of the first presentation, I'm going to just briefly go over the slides. We're just not going to go into the discussion questions. And also, this PowerPoint is available on the Meetup website, so you're welcome to see it. So before I jump into that, just a thank you to our sponsors, Nashville Tech Council and Axial Healthcare. Siku, I know you work for Axial, right? And Chad, you work for Axial, right? So they help make sure that this is possible. They write the check and make sure that we have a room and all of this. So be sure to ask them about what that company is and what they do, and thank you them for hosting us. Okay. So a little bit about me. Christine told you. I started out in clinical background. I went to school to become a paramedic at 18, fresh out of high school. And I looked around and nobody was a paramedic past the age of 40 at the time. So I said, well, I better find a different career line. So I started working in the IT area just because I played with computers as a kid. And so I was interested in that, and I morphed over into the IT side. Cerner Millennium was the system that I wound up working with the most over the life of my career. Started working with that product in 2001. And if you're familiar with the healthcare environment, hospitals and doctors' offices, well, at least hospitals, there's really only two major vendors out there selling EMRs for hospitals, Epic and Cerner. There's legacy stuff that's still around, like Meditech. Meditech's still actually selling, but they're the third player, third party. And then there's a whole bunch of legacy stuff that nobody's selling anymore. So we're pretty much going to just two, and I work on one of them. And just so you guys know, I'm self-employed. I've got my own company. I consult with hospitals. I don't make a very good employee. I never worked well with authority. So I decided to become self-employed, and it's a struggle. I would not recommend it to everybody. There are good days and bad days. I've been self-employed since 2008, had my own company since then. So it takes time and patience. It's not something I recommend to everybody. So if you like where you're at or what you do as an employee, that's great. If you're thinking about going independent, talk to a few people who've been self-employed for a little while before you make that leap. It's a big leap. But in any case, that's where I'm at, and I have a couple employees, and I like to keep my company small. So that's what I do, and my clients are hospitals. So what I wanted to do was what Lucas and I, the organizer who works with Christine and Chad on the meetups, was I said, well, why don't I talk about the business of healthcare data? Not even analytics, really. We know that you use data to do analytics, but just the business of how do hospitals make money, and why do they care about the data? Like how's the data important from the standpoint of how hospitals stay in business, make money and do their thing. A lot of healthcare data tends to focus on, we're going to improve outcomes, we're going to cure cancer, we're going to make you live longer, we're going to make you happier. And that's great, and that's very worthwhile. But at the end of the day, hospitals are still businesses. They have to make money, they have to pay the bills. They're no exception. The industry is a little not the same as the real world, but at the end of the day, they still have a CFO, they still have to make money. So, and we don't tend to always know, like, how do hospitals make money and how does that work? So Lucas and I talked about this, and I said, well, I'd like to present about that. And so my focus on writing this presentation is looking at business, the business of healthcare, and being opportunity focused. So that's a big theme in being self-employed and running a company, is looking for opportunities. How can we make money, or how can we create a product that will help our clients make money or be more profitable or save more money? And that's not necessarily a bad thing in healthcare, because at the end of the day, they still have to write the checks and make more than they spend. So these are some of the questions that I ask whenever I look for an opportunity. I'll say, do you have a problem I can solve? And there's a lot of things inside of that. Do you have a problem that I can solve? So you have to have some issue. If your life's going great, then, well, there's an opportunity for me. And you might have a problem, but it might not be something that I know how to solve. So first, I have to answer the first question, yes. Second question is are you willing to spend money on it? And there's two things in there. You want to spend the money, and you have the money to spend. So if you don't have, I mean, everybody wants solutions to problems, but if you don't have the money to spend on it, then you're not willing to. You only want to spend $1, you want free. That's not going to work. So the second question has to be yes. And then we do a little bit of competitive analysis. How many others are like you? How many other opportunities can I scale this solution to? And then the fourth question is how many others are like me who are going to be out there competing with me and making it difficult? Those are the questions that I ask. These are the same questions that CFOs ask about what their hospitals deliver. So do you have a problem I can solve? You may have a sickness, but I don't have a cure for it. I may only be able to treat it, or I can't do anything about it. Is there money to be paid for it? Will insurance reimburse for it? If they're not going to reimburse for it, then maybe we shouldn't be in that, delivering that, because we're just going to lose money. How many others are like you? How many other people have that sickness or that illness or that problem that they are seeking treatment for? And finally, how many other hospitals are delivering solutions or tackling that? So these are the questions that need to be asked about any kind of a business opportunity, whether it's in my line of business, a consulting opportunity to a hospital, or in a hospital's line of business for the types of services they provide to their customers. And one other thing that I like to throw out there is healthcare is really big, it's very diverse, and it's constantly changing. It's like, what is the big data, the 3 V's, or I don't know, they're always adding more, volume, velocity, and variety. That's so true about healthcare. So if you're getting into this, don't expect to know it all. And even if you try to go out there and just cram it all in and learn as much as you possibly can, get 5 degrees and go on a whole bunch of TED, it's all going to change anyway. So you can't know it all. Just accept that and focus on something that you do want to know, make some accomplishments, some successes, and then expand from there. Trust me, once you start getting some accomplishments and then some successes with those accomplishments, people will naturally come to you and start asking questions about all kinds of stuff, and then you'll start going, well, hold on, I don't really know about that. Let's go get somebody else. So anyway, so that's the high level. Any questions so far? Any thoughts? Okay. Relationships and dialogue, and again, I'm going to start I'm going to start skipping through these slides here pretty quickly. These are some of the things that I suggest to folks that I mentor when you're developing your relationships with others. Since you can't know it all, you're going to need to rely on other people who know their area. So seek to understand, form the question, and then seek the answers. This definitely implies analysis. Peers know people similar to you. So you don't want to isolate yourself and then say, well, I'm going to know it all, and I don't want to, ignore the competition. Know other people like you. You will learn from them. And as you develop those relationships and interact with them, you'll have things to offer them that you discover, and they'll do the same back to you, and you both benefit. That is the foundation of building career-long networking and relationships that you will use later in your career. It might seem early on that you don't want to knowledge share, or you don't want to do it, or you might say, I don't really know anything, I don't have anything to offer. That is the foundation of networking, is offering whatever you have. And maybe in the beginning, it's just your time or your motivation or your eagerness. And then as you get more experience to do more of it, you actually have things that you can offer, like here's some products or some solutions that I did. And eventually, here's other people that I know that can help you with your problems or your opportunities. Mentors know who you want to emulate. I like to suggest that you find people that you want to emulate. I'm looking at you, Siku, because you're really good at that. You seek that out. You said, you look for people that, have the traits that you want to have, and then copy that. I mean, it's so much easier to find like a blueprint where somebody's already done something, and then you just do that, right? You could say, well, there's a pretty good chance this is going to work. I might tweak it a bit. Nothing wrong with that. Same thing with relationships and professionalism. You could do the same. Flattery is the highest form of compliment. And finally, know other people in other industries for similarity. So for example, and for me, I look at the aviation industry because there's a lot of fail-safes that have to be in aviation that are also in equivalent in healthcare. I look at manufacturing because they do a lot of high service, a lot of consistency, the same thing over and over again, and reducing costs, which is something that healthcare also has to do. I also look at retail from a service aspect in some of the service industries. How are they trying to make customers happy? How do customers respond to that? Setting expectations and so on. You can have your own, whatever you are comfortable with, where you find parallels. These are just the ones that I use, that I'm particularly fascinated by. All right, so last slide on the soft stuff is form questions. Get used to forming questions. You may already do this. Questions aren't just for getting information. They help you frame the problem. What is the thing? What is the opportunity? What is, if we say, oh, well, somebody has this issue and I think I might be able to solve it, or they're willing to spend money on it, nobody else is solving it. Okay, well, how do you form that into, how you're going to frame the opportunity in terms of that you're going to go sell it to? How does the client define their problem, whatever their issue is? I'll give you an example. We can't seem to calculate all the number of inpatient stays we've had for the past year by nursing unit. Okay, there's a problem. How do we get all of the stays at this hospital by discharge location? That's frame the question and try and answer it. And you can present that back to your client or to your boss and say, does this sound like the problem we're trying to solve? Questions also identify what you don't know. If you know the answer to it, then you go, oh, I've got that report, here you go. Well, then you're done. So the benefit to that is also, if you don't know the answer, then when you do get the answer, you'll know when you're done. It seems kind of stupid to say that, but if you try to just go after answers and you don't know what the questions are that you're trying to solve for, you're just doing a lot of busy work. I know there's data discovery, but trust me, when you get into the business, and I think Christine knows this, and she's smiling, is there's way more data than you have to, you care about. So figure out what the questions are first. What are the problems? What are the questions? And then we'll go answer those. Researchers can play in the data all day long. They've got their grants and money, and we're focused on the business part. The last one is, what do your customers want? I always know what that is. Now, for me, my customers are hospitals. If you're in a position in an organization, then your internal customers are your customers. What group are you serving? If you provide, if you're in HR, then your internal customers are your hiring managers at your departments. If you're in IT, your internal customers are the people that you provide IT services to. If you're in sales, your customers are actual customers external to your organization. Or if you're in delivery and operations, your customers are actual customers. So find out what your customers want and keep pace with that. Okay, so the next several slides are about the business of healthcare, and I'm going to get past that. The one thing that I wanted to leave as a takeaway in part one was you can't know it all, so be prepared to form relationships and form questions. Once you have the question, start asking the people that you know the question, and they might have the answer. They might have the same question at least, and you can help solve the problem together. It's also useful because it gets you in the frame of mind of not expecting to, expect yourself to know all of the answers. If you're asking questions, then it puts you in a better frame of mind to not go like, why don't I know this? Why am I struggling to find out? This slide was useful. This is how the healthcare industry makes money. And I think this was kind of telling for some for folks. Is healthcare delivery, which are doctors and hospitals and pharmacies and labs, businesses that are in the business of giving healthcare directly to patients. They actually touch the patients they interact with. They tend to be mostly nonprofit in our industry. There are some for-profit like HCA, but most are nonprofit. In the United States, we kind of have an ethical dilemma with trying to make money off of sickness, and we go, well, we don't really like that. We think that everybody should be able to get healthcare. But the truth is that, well, hospitals still have to make a bit of money. They can't have a loss, not too many times in a row. It has to be made up somewhere. Now, if they're not for profit, they might take that extra profit that they make and then spend it in the organization after it's been made. But all these other industries around the healthcare industry are for profit. And that should not be ignored. I'm a for-profit business. I provide solutions to my customers, and I make a profit off of that. Not only do I make a living, but I should be making more than I spend. Pharma does it. IT does it. Health medical device. Pharmacies do it. Insurance companies do it. They all do it. And that's how the industry actually makes money and why people get into the business. And so it's an exchange. These businesses need the health delivery, and the health delivery folks, the hospitals and doctors, need this industry to serve them. And that's how the industry actually makes money. So this is another slide is where does the money come from? We've got all the different insurances. I think that's very important to know if you're going to know where does the money come from to pay for our health care. And I'm not trying to get political or talk about Obamacare or who should pay for it or how much or any of that. I'm just saying, where does it today, where is it coming from? Medicare is the overwhelmingly largest spender of money for healthcare services. 2/3 of the healthcare products and services that you will receive in your lifetime, you will receive in the last 1/3 of your life. So most of us in here aren't big users of healthcare. The fact that you walked in here and you came in here and you're a working professional tells me that you're not in that last third. Even if you're older, it doesn't matter. Once you start settling down and retiring and you start having chronic conditions, then you're in that last third. You start using a lot more. So Medicare covers everybody 65 and older when they're in that last third. There's different parts. It's totally funded by 2.9% of all income in the United States is taxed. You pay half of that. 1.65% comes out of your paycheck, and that's part of your FICA deduction. Your employer pays another 1.65 behind the scenes that you don't see. You're self-employed, you paid the whole thing. So it's even. Medicaid covers poor, disabled, orphan, children. It varies by state, so Medicare is the same across the United States. Medicaid varies by state depending on where you live. 90% of all Medicaid is funded by the federal government. Medicare is 100% federal government. 90% of $9 out of $10 in Medicaid is paid by the federal government. The other $1 is paid by that state and their budget. So that has to come out of their taxes or however they fund it. And in Tennessee, we don't pay an income tax, so I don't know how TennCare gets funded. In southern states or more conservative states, you tend to see less Medicaid, and in more Democrat states, you tend to see more expansive Medicaid programs. I used to live in Massachusetts, and at the time I was, I think, 26 and single and had no children, and if you made less than $50,000 or $40,000 a year, you could get coverage from the state. This is like the mid-2000s, before there was any state or government mandated insurance. This was during pre-existing conditions and everything else. You could get Medicaid in the state of Massachusetts just because you were under a certain income. Here, you've got to make less than $6,000 a year. You've got to have like at least one kid, and you have to be disabled. I mean, it's pretty strict to get into that group. So Medicaid varies from state to state. Some states see more or less Medicaid. Indigent doesn't make up nearly as much as you might think. 4%, 5% of the total revenues in the hospital is covered by that. Some hospitals don't get any. I know for-profit hospitals can't receive any. That's just, it's outside the rules. So they have to write it off. Cost of doing business. And finally, there's the military and then veterans. Military is delivered by, it has a program called TRICARE that lets military active service members go to doctors and get care. And TRICARE is what pays for it. That's the insurance that the military gives you. Veterans, after you've been injured in a war or you are considered a veteran, yeah, you have to be injured in, I think you have to be considered injured in the line of duty. Then you can get VA coverage. But once you leave the military, then you're kind of on your own unless you retire from the military. And of course, the military is unique in that they have their own healthcare delivery system. So if you're an active service member, you can go to any military hospital or clinic and get care, and it's all covered. It's delivered by the federal government to them. There's some other programs like Indian Health Service and others that make up smaller components that are also other kinds of means. But this is the overwhelming majority. There's also commercial insurance besides government payers. So this makes up the next largest group. Sometimes this is neck and neck with Medicaid. This covers all of us. This is what we're used to getting. And these are for-profit, or for the most part, for-profit. Blue Cross and Blue Shield is the largest network of insurers in the United States. Then you have the other commercial insurers. They tend to go after the large groups of employers. So Aetna's going to go after General Motors or large employers, and small employers like me are going to get coverage through Blue Cross. And of course, all the individual members now fall typically under Blue Cross, although we're starting to see more of the commercial payers get more into the individual market. It just depends on the economics. And then there's leftover types, auto coverage, if you get injured in a car accident, workers' comp. I don't see any more indemnity anywhere at any of my clients. That's very old classic insurance where they just pay whatever the bill is. And then finally, good old cash. You get the bill after everybody else says they're not going to pay. Okay, so these are some of those questions that it sparked a lot of conversation in part one, and we ended up spending the rest of the presentation about this, and I think we got to here, and then we ran out of time. So now that I'm about halfway through the presentation, we'll start talking about the actual data nuts and bolts. But before I get into that, any questions, thoughts, comments, anybody wants to throw out there? Yes, sir.
Explain the difference between rating.
Explain the difference between what?
Community rating.
I have no idea. The question was, so that the folks can hear me, what's the difference between community rating and
Group rating.
group rating? Was that on my slide?
Well, you were talking about self-insured market, like one of the main things insurance is that premiums are set based on risk versus the community rating. I just find it helpful.
I see. Yes. So, what's your name?
Joel.
Joel. So what Joel was pointing out is community rating versus, what was the other one?
Group rating.
Group rating. So in a large group employer, 100 employees or more, and sometimes that's 100 eligible employees or 100 actual enrolled. Not everybody enrolls in insurance in an employer. Once you get past that, that employer has the option. They're considered what's called large group. And a large group has the option, they'll usually be underwritten directly by the insurance company at that point. So let's say you get your insurance, you're a large group employer, you purchase on behalf for your employees medical insurance through Blue Cross. Blue Cross will say, based on the actual claims that have come in from your employees, this is your rating, and so we're going to set your premiums accordingly, which is why it's in the interest of those employers to keep their employees healthy. Or that's the positive spin on it. The negative spin is to not hire employees who are sick, which of course is discrimination, so you shouldn't do that. But you understand now why there's such laws around that. You go, well, it would be really bad if I was in a wheelchair and they didn't hire me. Well, the real reason is, that's why there's discrimination against women who are pregnant and employed for, apply for jobs. Well, I really want that job, so I have insurance to cover, delivering my baby. So, group or community rating is for either the large group employer can say, we will opt for the community rating instead, don't underwrite us individually. And some insurance companies don't offer that as an option, but you might if you employ a lot of people who may be sick. And then anybody who's under 100 employees typically gets what's called community rating. And that's where they just say everybody in the Metro Nashville area is costs about this much to take care of based on their age. And so there's different ratings systems that determine the premiums. Did I answer your question? Any other questions? Those are good questions. Okay. All right. I'm going to jump into some of the data and how it's organized. This is the data that I work with, my clients deal with. So if you're interested in working with the data that is inside of a hospital, whether it's for clinical analysis or it's for financial or operational, whatever kind of analysis you're doing, there's a standard structure to that data. An example might be, if I were to liken this to another industry, if I was doing the analysis on an airline, we would say, okay, let's define a flight, let's define a passenger, let's define an airplane, let's define a fare, let's define a ticket. Let's define those terms and then define their relationships between each other. So now I'm going to talk about that structure in terms of a hospital. So if you're not familiar with it, here we go. So the root of the fundamental measurement in hospital financial metrics is what's called the encounter. And an encounter is if you're an inpatient, meaning you stay overnight, then that's from the moment you arrive to the moment you leave. If it's not that, then it's called an outpatient. And there's different kinds of outpatients, but an outpatient is technically from the moment you arrive to the moment you leave, but it's typically for only a single day. So you can't be there overnight and be an outpatient. And there's some exceptions to that, as there are in healthcare. So there's always going to be exceptions to everything I tell you. Here's the rules, now here's all the exceptions. but two main divisions of encounters, inpatient and outpatient. They're called a visit, an episode. It's all the same thing. I'm used to the term encounter. So if you're a patient and you have one medical record, you have one to many encounters, or zero to many. I have ever shown up. A single episode of care, legally, a physician is responsible for your care during the life of that encounter. So the moment you walk into the clinic to the moment you walk out, a physician's legally happen. There you go. A physician is legally responsible for your care, a licensed medical practitioner or a mid-level provider or somebody, a nurse, and they can't release you from that care until they've determined that you're free to go. Of course, you can walk out the door at any time, but an encounter is from admit to discharge. If you're not an inpatient, then there's four main types of outpatients, and these can be subclassified hospital specific, but across the industry, there's four main types. We'll just call these classes: emergency, observation, outpatient, and recurring. And the rule kind of goes like this. Did you stay overnight? You did. And did you stay for more than 3 days, more than 72 hours? If you did, you're an inpatient. That's one set of billing rules. If that's not the case, if you stayed for less than that, you stayed for, say, you didn't stay overnight, but you stayed for between 1 day and 72 hours, then you're what's considered observation. Now, you could be an inpatient for that long. Let's say you had an appendectomy and you got out of the hospital in less than 3 days. You're still an inpatient. Observation is you can't stay longer than 72 hours, and you're only being observed. So the level of nursing care you get is low, and it's just to see in case anything goes wrong with you. So I get chest pain. I go to the emergency room. They say, you're actually fine. You just had gas or heartburn or whatever, but we're going to put you in observation in case it's not really that, so that if you have a heart attack, you're already here in the hospital. And that has its own billing rules. If you're not observation, then you're outpatient. I'm sorry, if you came into the emergency room and you did not get admitted, or if you didn't get admitted, then you're an emergency patient. You can either die or walk out the door or get transferred. Emergency is unique in that you had to come in through the ER. So going to your doctor's office and just showing up and saying, oh, I have this pain. That's not an emergency visit. It may be an emergency to you, but that doesn't fall under emergency rules. You have to actually go into an emergency room licensed by the state. Finally, if you're not any of those, then you're an outpatient. So that's kind of how we apply the rules on classifying. There's a special kind of outpatient, not all outpatients are this, called a recurring. A recurring is where you keep coming back for the same trial of treatment. So like chemo, physical therapy. So instead of creating one separate outpatient encounter every time you show up, we just create one, and that one will carry for a month at a time. And then the bill goes to the insurance company at the end of each month during the recurring encounter. Recurring encounter could be for one visit, or it could be for over a year. But the general rule is when you go into recurring, then the hospital can bill once a month. Otherwise, the rule on all these other encounter types is they can't bill until you're gone. So you could be an inpatient for 3 months. The hospital's got to keep spending, keep providing services. They have to they're down the road, open, doors open 24/7, ready to receive patients, ready to take care of you, and they don't even know how they're going to get paid. No other business does business like that. It is. It's absolutely crazy. And they can't what we say, drop a bill. Drop a bill just means, okay, you've left and we can now issue a bill, right? They can't drop a bill until after you're discharged. And then they have to wait about 5 days usually because the doctor has to get their notes in. They've got to do a bunch of coding and review the charts and figure out all the different charge codes. And then they finally get to send the bill. And then it'll take the insurance company at least 30 days to respond. I think you have 30 days to bill, and then they've got 30 to 60 to respond to that. So you could be looking at 90 days out before even the first insurance company sends you a denial. Oh, guess what? On the 89th day, we told you we're not going to pay. Now you start over and you go, wait a minute, we appealed the denial. We want to, find out why you denied. Oh, it's because you didn't code this certain thing, whatever. Okay, well, we coded. Here you go. Start the clock again. So you can see how an inpatient stay that maybe is $45,000, let's say its value is $45,000, so they're actually going to get paid. The charge is, say, $100,000. They have to carry that. That's why you might not get the bill until like a year after you had your visit. So a hospital has to carry all that accounts receivable day after day after day. And all the while they're doing that, those doors are open, accepting more patients. So financial analysis for a hospital is a huge deal. There's entire industry built for it that all they do is analyze this and figure out how do we get the dollars sooner? How do we make sure we get the claim and get it paid the first time? Yes, sir.
So if you as a patient's family, can you view the charges as they're accumulating, or can you not even view them?
You, like while you're in your stay?
Yeah, well the patient, I'm the patient's family. I want to view all the charges.
It's certainly possible. Okay, so the question is can I, during my stay, can me or my family view the charges that are accumulating? And it's technically possible, yes. The hospital can do that. I think most hospitals would say, we don't have a way to do that for you. And I don't know if that's a regulatory requirement that they would have to meet that. That's why whenever you go to the hospital, this is the crazy thing, you go to the hospital and say, I don't have insurance, I need to have a surgery, how much is it gonna cost? And they're like, we have no idea, you know? That's just like going to the mechanic and saying, my car's broken, how much would it cost to fix it? And you don't even, but hey, you are not allowed to look at the car. I'm not going to tell you what model it is. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. How much will it cost to fix? So that's the equivalent scenario that a hospital's in. What's fascinating is that in inpatient encounters, remember, we go back to these types because these types play a huge role in how you get paid. Inpatients get paid on what's called DRG, or diagnosis-related grouper, or just sometimes you just hear the word grouper. What a DRG means is there's about 700 of them, and they're like reasons you come to the hospital and get admitted. And that is what Medicare will pay for your visit. They don't pay any more than that. It's a flat amount. Whether you stay 2 days or 2 months, it's that amount. Now, if things got complicated and your DRG could change during the course of the stay, let's say you go in for, because you had a heart attack, and then they give you some treatment, and then they realize you've got a tumor, and then they operate that, and they do all these other things, and and then let's say you die, right? And so you were there for 2 months, and you had all these different things happen to you. Well, your DRG would change, and it would get more complicated, right? But it's still a flat amount. So it boggles me that even the insurance companies wised up to this, Medicare wised up to it, yet when we walk to the hospital and say, how much will this cost? They can't tell you because you don't get to get paid or pay on DRG. Only the insurance companies do.
Is there a way you can find out what the potential DRGs are and how much will be paid?
Sure, absolutely. Just individuals have no means of negotiating that kind of thing. So a lot of time, and this is why I suggest to people who say, well, insurance is expensive, I don't have insurance. I say, just get any insurance. Because it's like getting a Costco membership. Suddenly, I get access to all the good prices, right? That's what insurance gets you. Even if the deductible is $10,000 or $15,000, well, you would have been billed anyway, but at least you're going to spend $30 for some chargeable item instead of $100, which is the list price. Yes, sir.
Well, and just one thing to add to that is that one of the requirements of the Affordable Care Act was that for certain community recognized hospitals, they are required, or at least strongly encouraged to give financial counseling upon discharge. So they'll be like, hey, we don't know how much this is going to cost, but here's a bunch of brochures and here's some phone numbers to call and stuff like that. So it still stinks as a patient. Like personally, I went through that one time, but they're at least saying like if you need to go through a payment plan or something, you're required to do that now.
And that's a good thing. So what Joel said is community hospitals are required regulatorily now to provide financial counseling to you prior to your admission when feasible. Most hospitals do financial counseling before you walk in the door. There'll usually be a little booth either by pre-admissions for elective admissions or by the ED in case you're not emergent to talk about how do you have insurance? Are you eligible for insurance? Could you get on Medicaid? Because trust me, the hospital would much rather you have some kind of insurance, any insurance, than just have to bill you as what we call self-pay. And self-pay is, I have no insurance, do whatever you must to me, save my life, do whatever you have to do, and just send me a bill. We know how that goes. The hospital knows how it goes. And they don't want that because they know what's going to happen, right? So that's why having any kind of insurance is useful. Get the cheapest insurance you can find with the absolute highest deductible. It's the equivalent of being self-pay, but you get discounted prices. Just so everybody knows, I think I quoted the stat at our last meeting. I have several different clients of different sizes and different geographies all over the U.S. Some are in big markets, some are in small markets, some are mini hospitals, some are tiny little hospitals, some are a mix of all those things. And when I look at all their reimbursement, they average anywhere between 33 cents and 45 cents on the dollar. That's what they actually get at the end of the day after the encounter is completely done and over with. They've collected as much as they can from all the insurance companies and from the patient. That's how much they actually get. So when you get a charge for $100, the hospital is collecting, let's just say 30%. That's what they actually get paid, 30 bucks. So that's a huge differential. I don't know any other industry that has that kind of delta in the pricing. Maybe the airline industry. You get a $69 fare and you're sitting next to somebody who paid $800. But
isn't it more like it's a list price in a way?
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm in the IT world, so IT business, something costs $100,000, but you're going to get it for $52,000.
Yep. That's exactly what it is, a list price. And the way list pricing is typically determined at a hospital is how much did it cost for us to deliver services last year? And figure out what the allocation of costs is for, drugs and overhead and everything, labor, and allocate that accordingly. Okay, we've done that against what we call our charge master, everything that we could possibly charge for. Well, but we had a shortfall of 8% last year, or 2%, or whatever that is. Okay, we'll raise the prices on everything by an equivalent percentage for this year. Well, you can see how over the years that's just going to go up, because every year the insurance companies pay a little bit less for the same things. That's just what they do. They say, well, you've been doing this, you're getting better at it. It has less value because medical care is advancing, and also because we have the power to squeeze you, negotiating power. So we're going to pay you a little bit less. Well, it has to be made up somewhere. So we increase the list price on things. Only the difference is that the majority of where the money comes from is insurance, and they're paying less. So where does that leave the difference? Well, if 10% of all the people that come into a hospital are self-pay, and the shortfall is 8%, that's going to be sounds like 80% increase. I don't know if my math is right, but something along those lines on the list prices to the self-pay. They increase those to the insurance companies, but we don't even send the list prices to the insurance companies. They just get totaled up and say, here's what the bill would have been. And I don't think the insurance company does anything with that. I think they just kind of like throw it away. They don't even look at it. But it does come down to the financial analysis for the hospital. And of course, if you're self-pay, that's what shows up on your bill. And there's no negotiating that. You can try. Yes, sir.
So, okay, good question.
Yep.
So, hospitals and self-pay bill me, and I decide not to pay. Like, what's something the hospital do to try and improve?
They can send you collections.
You sign before you can see a doctor, and who is your final responsibility part? Usually yourself, or if the child, it is the parents. So you should sign it before you get into the room for the doctor. So I think that helps you accountable. And then if you don't pay, so they will call up and pick up that piece of paper that you signed and then go to for the agency.
Yep.
Get the money. I think of course, at the end of the day, if you don't pay it, they probably don't have to. No other method, just like write it off.
Yeah. And my experience has been the larger the institution, the more apt they are to either write off or negotiate down the price. The smaller the institution, and by smaller, I mean like doctor offices, individual doctor's offices, are usually the most aggressive at pursuing, just broadly speaking. And you might say, well, why is that the case? Well, I mean, imagine I'm a self-employed guy. I've got 1 to 2 employees. If one of my customers doesn't pay their bill, that's a huge impact to my bottom line. They all have to pay the bill. We can negotiate the bill a little bit, but there's no like not paying, right? But in an enormous organization, one person not paying is not going to cause people to lose their jobs, right? Or change the overall fundamentals. So what they'll do, larger organizations, also usually like Catholic hospital, any sort of religious affiliated hospital, Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, especially Catholics, they tend to be, they have charitable care as part of their mission, which means that they automatically accept a certain amount of, we're gonna have to write a certain amount off, because that's just part of our mission. And it's our CFO's job to figure out where to make some profit to make up for that. But we are not allowed to go sue people and put them into medical bankruptcy. So different hospitals have different philosophies on that.
Now, I've heard for some high individual, there's some doctor association which you can buy into, and you will prepay, if you will, and they'll give you time automatically whenever you need it. How does that work? You don't think about that?
I've not heard of that. Has anyone else heard of that? Prepaid medical?
Yeah, and so you would basically, you'd have insurance, and then you would have some additional that you would pay this bunch of doctor's offices, and then you would go basically to the, to the front of the line, if you will, if there's some problems. Huh?
I don't know if this answers your question, but my doctor, when I had insurance, when I didn't have insurance, my doctor would, or at least a nurse would give me the bill in the beginning before treatment and charge me a flat fee.
Yeah.
And then after treatment, after consultation, and I check out, they'll either refund me what's left over or charge extra.
Fascinating. I can tell you that when you're self-pay, when you don't have insurance, or even if you have insurance, but before you've received care, prices are totally negotiable.
Yes, yes.
You can completely negotiate, hospitals, doctors, everybody. Now, whether they respond to that tactic is another story. They don't have to, right? But as long as you haven't actually received any of the care first, you can totally negotiate the price. And
Even after.
sometimes,
If you show that you are unable to pay, and then it is negotiable, it could be even put in the installment payment.
yes.
Or if they would even like give you a discount because it's better than nothing. So, and also some for charity reasons that I know a friend like he couldn't pay his mother-in-law that spent a long time in the hospital, and it is no insurance. And so, but they really, really want not to get away. They really want to pay, but they're just out of their affordable. And so the hospital arranged my installment and also give them a discount. Yeah, and so it is after receipt of the service already.
Yes, you can go into payment plans and
Yeah, payment plan, that kind of thing.
other options. One thing I would caution you on is if you get the care first, you're rolling the dice, because the organization has a legal, you have a legal obligation to pay that debt to the hospital, whatever they say it is. So, and if you don't, they could send you to collections, bankruptcy, they could do all these things. So, and one other thing is if you have insurance, so here's the other, hey, I said, hey, no matter what, just go get the cheapest insurance you can find at the most outrageous deductible. At least you get the negotiated prices. The flip side of that is you can't negotiate that after you've received it. You can't say, well, the insurance company said that, you charged me $100, but they said you can only, we've negotiated $30. You have to pay that 30, and you can't negotiate the 30. You can't say, well, how about I give you 25, especially after you got the bill and after the insurance company's paid the claim. That's prohibited in their contract. So the contract between the insurance company and the hospital or the doctor says you're not allowed to do that with your patients, and if you do, you're going to get in trouble. So they have to sort of they have to force the issue if you have insurance. So, and unfortunately, we don't have a lot of price transparency in the United States. We don't know what the list prices are, and we don't know what the insurance companies pay either. So we're kind of like, well, if I get insurance, I don't get insurance, it's still going to be a lot. How much is it supposed to cost?
Well, if I have insurance, the insurance company gives me a bill, how much they paid and how much I have to pay, so all the transparency is there.
After you get the services.
After it's always.
Yeah. Imagine going to McDonald's and saying, I'm really hungry, feed me. And they go, you can have all you want. You eat all you want.
And then
And then they give you a bill at the end and you're like, that'll be $437. And you're like, Yeah, like $10 a fry, you know, and you go, well, wait a minute, hold on. I was just hungry. You know, I didn't know it was going to be this much. Yeah, but you said you would just pay whatever. Do you have food insurance? Oh, that'll only be $300, you know. Yes, ma'am.
You might cover this later, I'm not sure, but how does, so Vanderbilt takes patients that don't have insurance, right? And I know because of TennCare, well, I would not say that, because I might mess it up, but how do they handle?
Uninsured, right?
Yeah, uninsured, I mean, I know yeah, I mean.
Some organizations, and I was mentioning charitable care, take that as part of their mission. But a hospital will usually decide before they admit you whether you're eligible. And usually, in order for them to say that they have that, they're required to have policies that say this is how we evaluate the rules, so that people aren't unfairly discriminated against, and also so they we know what the rules are themselves and can turn it off if they get too far. But it tends to be a wholesale, like we have these policies and you're eligible, you can apply, and then and you're in, versus you're not. The law, as far as getting treatment, and that's covered by a law called EMTALA. You may have heard of it, and it was passed, I think, back in the 1970s, 1974 or 6 or something like that. And it says that if you are having a medical emergency, or you think you are, or you are a woman and in active labor, then a licensed hospital or emergency room is required to see you. They have to evaluate you, determine if you are really having an emergency or having a baby, and if you are, to treat you or to stabilize you and transfer you to another facility. You have to be stable enough for transfer. So they can't say, like, while you're having a heart attack, see ya, put you in an ambulance and send you on your way. That would be violating EMTALA. They would have to do whatever they need to do to get you to a stable point to then, at the earliest, transfer you, or they can discharge you. So that's why people who get emergency care as their primary care will rack up big bills, because emergency room is a very expensive way to get it. And then they say the emergency physician says you should see this physician, the specialist, about your condition. Well, that specialist doesn't have to see you because you're not emergent, until your problem becomes so problematic again that it becomes an emergency and back to an emergency. So that's what EMTALA is. EMTALA also does not relieve you, if you are the patient, of your financial responsibility to the hospital. It only obligates the hospital to provide the services. They can still bill you, and you are still liable for that. And that's it. That's what EMTALA does. There is no other law that says, oh, this hospital has to see you, treat you, negotiate. And it's bad business if they're turning people away and they're dying on their front doorstep. All right, I got more to go through, so this is great. These are great questions. I'm glad you guys are engaged. All right, let's talk a little bit more about billing. Okay, so I talked about the different classes. So you got inpatient, emergency, observation, outpatient, recurring. Recurring is just a recurring form of outpatient. So really, we've got inpatient and everybody else, outpatient. Of any one of those visits, there's 2 kinds of claims. So each kind of encounter can have up to 2 kinds of claims. Okay, so a hospital, inpatient, or an emergency or whatever. You can have what's called a Part A, or institutional or hospital claim. These go by a lot of different words, but they all mean the same thing. Institutional, technical, hospital, it's the hospital's bill. That is the facility bill. So that is billed per encounter. So only after your encounter is over can they submit the claim for that. The claim form is called a UB04. It's also technically called a CMS 1450 if you're giving it to Medicare, but the industry standard is called the UB04, or you may just hear UB. And then that is the paper form. The electronic form is called an 837I. I is for institutional. The other kind of claim that can also be generated by your encounter is a professional claim. That is the fee that's charged by the physician to provide their professional services. So this is the claim up here for the hospital, for your room, the drugs, your meals, whatever it is they charge you for. And then this is billed by the physician, the surgeon, the anesthesiologist, the radiologist. And you can better believe there's going to be, if you get admitted, you're going to have like a zillion of these because they had every doctor and their brother come in to do something to you. So each doctor submits a professional claim per day of service for that physician. And that's on what's called a CMS or HCFA 1500, same thing. So those are just called 1500s. So a UB versus a 1500. And the electronic form is called 837P. And collectively, we just call all claims altogether 837s. Confused yet? I find this chart helps. I actually have I've been working with this data for years, and I still have a little thing posted on the front of my screen that says, oh, we didn't get the UBs because the 837Ps didn't go through on the such and such the other day, and it's like, what was that again? Oh, so they're talking about professional charges. Okay.
So what do you mean by paper claims? You still use paper, or are they enforced? Everyone uses electronic now?
No, there's still some paper claims out there. So like, let's say you go to Maury County Community Hospital, or Maury County Regional Hospital down in Columbia, and you're visiting from Idaho, and you have Idaho's Blue Cross. I don't even know if that's what it's really called. They probably don't have an electronic connection to submit claims to Idaho, because how many Idahoans are going to Maury County? So they may say, oh, we don't have a connection for that, so we're just going to mail them a paper claim. And it could be a paper claim for $100,000.
They actually mail it, maybe the fax it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's a variety of different infrastructures. So the ideal is you send it electronically. Some forms you can send the paper image to your clearinghouse, and your clearinghouse will convert it. There's a lot of different ways to get it from here to there. This is an XML structure. This is a standard form that you can download the image off the internet. But when I open one of these in my client's application in Cerner, it takes all the fields and lays them on a form so I can read it. But it's actually going out as an XML file. Okay, so an encounter has a life cycle. And I like to sort of marry this over to like airline industry, All right, you're thinking about going on the trip, you check the fares, you check them again, you check them again. Finally, you go like, oh, all right, either I'm going or I'm not. You make the purchase, then you have a moment of regret, and you're like, oh crap, now I'm locked in. And so then you get your receipt, and then you prepare for the trip, and then you pack your luggage, and you make sure you don't have anything over 3 ounces, and you do all this rigmarole, and you lug your, call the Uber, and you get there, and then you go through security, and you get the boarding pass, and did you check in? Oh, you didn't check in. Did you get a seat assignment? No, you didn't. I mean, it's all this sort of stuff that you go through before you finally get back home. Well, it's the same kind of thing in a hospital. So an encounter has a life cycle. It usually starts with scheduling. If you know you're going to be coming, let's schedule your appointment. Then somebody's going to call you and say, can I get your insurance? What's your name? Let me get all the information I possibly can get, because pre-registration is so they can come all the way back over here and get the money at the end. So they get that up front. Oh, we're calling to just schedule your appointment, Dr. So-and-so. We're looking forward to seeing you. So what's your name and your social security number, date of birth? Eligibility check. We check to make sure you have insurance and that it's actually valid. You didn't just get bogus information or we got it wrong. Finally, you get admitted, or you show up. You check in at the doctor's office, either one. The doctor evaluates you. He figures out what your problem is. Says, this is what I think it is. This is a treatment plan. They do things to you. Hopefully you get better. And then you discharge. At a clinic, you show up and hopefully 30 minutes later you're leaving. But an inpatient, you admit, and several days later you leave. After that happens, then your encounter is what's called coded. You ever hear like, oh, that's encoding, or it hasn't been coded yet, or the coders are working on it? If you hear that, that doesn't mean a code blue. That's a different kind of code. This is coding is where a professional coder, that's their title, goes in and reads all the notes on the chart, looks at all the charges, and says, here are all the diagnoses that apply to you, and those are ICD-10. And here's all the procedures which correspond to what was done to you. So diagnoses and treatments. What was wrong with you? What we did. What we did has to be justified by what was wrong with you. So if what was wrong with you was an AMI, or a heart attack, and the procedure code is removal of an ingrown toenail, that's going to get denied, because that doesn't pertain to your heart attack. It may be the other way around. We treated you for heart attack and the diagnosis code was ingrown toenail. So coding makes sure that all that gets right before the claim goes out the door. Once that's been done, after they do that, then the DRG is calculated, dependent based on all of the evidence, and they always try and find the DRG that pays the most. It's a totally legitimate thing to do. They then submit the claims, and it goes into the billing process, and they send the claim to the first insurer, and they wait for a response. They get a denial, they'll usually appeal it, and that process goes back and forth until they finally either give up or they pay. And once that's done, hold on a second. Once that's done, they then what's called roll to the second insurance, and the process repeats again. And they keep doing that back and forth. Every subsequent insurer gets to know what the prior insurer did. So that oftentimes secondary or tertiary, later insurances, will base their decisions based on what the first one decided. Also, the primary insurer gets to know that there are secondary insurances. That information gets submitted along with them.
So if the patient is there in multiple days, the coding is not done every day. It's only done
At the end.
full final discharge.
That is correct.
So they don't do eligibility check before scheduling? So in that case, what if I already schedule, I come then found out I'm not eligible, so they reduce the admission rate?
There's some, so the rule was, when does eligibility checking done relative to scheduling, I think is what you're asking. And there's some discussion about when does the legal relationship start with you and the physician and his responsibility for your care, depending on when they've seen you. If you are an entirely new patient to that physician, you've never seen them before, or it's an entirely new episode of care for, say, a cardiologist, they've already treated you and discharged you from their care, then your scheduled appointment doesn't technically, and most, as far as I know, does not create a legal relationship. But if you're already a patient, then it does. So if you're a new patient, they could check your insurance, realize you're not covered or it doesn't pay enough, and they could cancel your appointment. And that does not violate their argument, their requirement to see you. So sometimes eligibility checking is done literally during the phone call to schedule. What's your insurance? What do you have? Can you give me that number? Hold on just a second while I talk to my supervisor. They're really checking your eligibility. And those electronic conversations will happen instantaneously within a few seconds.
What happens if you are a patient, but your insurance has changed?
During the stay?
During, before your admission?
They're going to check that before you show up.
But no, but is the legal requirement to take care of you because you're already an established patient?
If you're an established patient, then they have a legal responsibility to care for you. If your insurance is no longer valid, then they can just charge you whatever if you choose to continue. And they'll usually say, hey, by the way, is your insurance up to date? Because I showed that it says you're not covered. So if you want the doctor to see you today, yeah, we're gonna charge you and bill you, or you're gonna have to pay right now.
But it's still legally responsible.
Yes. Yeah.
So how do they make sure coding is correctly done? No, because I'm a person, maybe you don't know anything about the coding, but if they did the coding wrong, I could be charging more. So.
The question is how do we make sure that the coding is done right? There's entire buildings down in Franklin. That's their business, is to make sure that you're doing that right. And of course, it's highly subjective. It's not highly subjective. It can be subjective. And there's a fine line between what the doctor documents and what the coder codes. Technically, a coder cannot, let's say the doctor hasn't finished his note. The coder's waiting on it in order to do their coding so they can bill it. The coder can contact the physician and say, hey, I need your note from that visit. Can you finish it, please? Sure. I'm trying to figure out whether to put such and such on there. What gets us paid more? The coder's not allowed to tell them what pays them more.
One question. You mentioned earlier the doctor bills every day.
Yes.
Right? But the doctor can't bill until the coding is done.
No. The doctor has their own coding. It's two separate coding processes,
So
hospital and physician. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the same process would happen, but let's say you're an inpatient and I'm a radiologist and I read your x-ray. You're still in the hospital. I can go ahead and submit my claim for reading your x-ray.
Right.
I'm going to do the coding process, but the coding on professional claims is usually pretty straightforward.
Okay.
there's usually a pretty good crosswalk between these diagnosis codes will legitimately pay these procedure codes, and those professional coders who do professional billing know what does and doesn't. Whereas inpatient is a whole other ballgame. Most coders don't do both. They either do hospital or they do professional. It's uncommon to find somebody who has enough experience that does both, because you're only as good as, you know, when you did it last. So even if we all became coders and then we stopped doing it for a year, we'd be out of date. You have to do it all the time to stay up to speed. I'm going to skip over these questions because we got more stuff to cover. But I think we've had some really good questions here. You guys are bringing up really good topics that make sense. These are common data elements that are looked at on an encounter. Now, my company, just to give you reference, my company makes a piece of software that installs into Cerner and will extract all of the data that's relevant to financial analysis centered around that and send it into a different system that we don't make, that's made by Change Healthcare and other vendors as well. That all it does is do financial analysis, but it needs the data, and that's not what it does. And my job is to get the data and make sure that it's not starved of data. Our data extraction engine, I looked today, has over 1,500 data elements that we send. So this is just a sample. And what I want to do is pick out the most important common ones that you will hear that are pretty industry standard from hospital to hospital. So every encounter has to have an identifier that's usually called a FIN number or a visit number or an account number or a CSN if you're an Epic. Is that right?
Yes.
That sound right? Okay. When did you arrive? That was, when did you actually walk in the door? Admit date. If you walked in the door of the emergency room, that's one time. When they finally decided to admit you is a different time. Discharge. When did you leave? Encounter type. Those are the 5 types I mentioned before. What the facility, that's the hospital or the clinic that you received your care at. The admitting provider, so every encounter has to have an admitting physician. Which physician is licensed and took the legal responsibility of your care to admit you. And then you have to have an attending who's responsible for your care throughout the course of the visit. Most hospitals, it's one and the same. At academic institutions, it can change. The attending can move around. Where did you come? Who referred you? You came by ambulance, or Dr. So-and-so referred you, or you just walked in the door. Where did you go to when you leave? How did you arrive? Ambulance car. Financial class. That's a huge one. Financial class is what is the type of financial coverage you have at the top level. And so for people over 65, it's going to be Medicare. For us, it's going to be commercial. And if you don't have any insurance, it's going to be self-pay. Or if you're Medicaid, Medicaid always comes first, Medicare comes second, commercial comes third, and everything else comes last. Unless you have auto injury, auto accident, or workers' comp, and then that comes first, and then all the rest. Yeah.
In the length of stay, usually in your app or in your practice, how do you calculate? Is it calculated field?
Yes.
The length of stay, right? That is which minus which is like the
there's about 6 different.
Day minus the admit day, or
the length of stay is or the question is how do you calculate length of stay, or sometimes just called LOS. And so that can vary depending on your process. There's patient days, there's discharge days, there's length of stay, and sometimes time is taken into account, sometimes it's not. How many midnights? That's census days. So there's all these different sort of terms, and I found that every hospital defines it a little bit differently. So we, in our extraction engine, we actually have like 7 different length of stay fields, and we calculate it 7 different ways. And we still also provide all the dates and times, so they can calculate it in other ways they want as well.
And it seems I hear people say, like a patient coming from the ED, and it already has like what we call the resources they stay. And then when the patient's like admitted to the hospital, which may be another day, and then so they lump all this into one bill. And so which is the starting point to calculate the length of stay? It's very controversial.
It is.
So we talk about how to calculate this length of stay, and depending which reference time, date, and time you use.
Oh, yeah. Your chief nursing officer will want one. Your chief medical officer will want a different one. Your CFO will want yet another one. Your COO will want a different one because they all have different responsibilities they're measuring. How long was your trip when you left? You know, when you went on this vacation, when you bought that ticket? Well, was it the moment you left your home? Was it the moment you arrived at the airport? Was it the moment that you got on the plane? Was it the moment you went wheels up? You know, there's all these different calculation methods. The flight attendants get paid based on what they call wheels up, wheels down. So the moment the wheels leave the ground, they start getting paid. The moment the wheels touch the ground, they stop getting paid. It used to be when the door was closed, the DOT started tracking on-time percentages. They required airlines to do that starting about 20 years ago, 15 years ago. When they started doing that, airlines said, well, if the flight from Nashville to LA takes about 3.5 hours, let's say 4 hours, 4 hours, and our on time is looking bad. Let's just say it takes 4.5 hours. Just make it take longer. You notice how now you're always showing up early and there's nobody at the gate? It's for that very reason. Well, then the CFO of the airline got smart. He's like, wait a minute. Hey, Mr. COO, your requirement to meet the DOT's on-time requirements costing us money because our flight attendants and pilots are paid based on when the door closes and when it opens. And if we get held on the tarmac, why should we pay them? We got expenses and everything else going on. So they said, well, we're going to change how they get paid. We're going to do it based on wheels up, wheels down. So the airline does not care. Well, they do care because it's fuel, but they don't care as much in terms of labor if when the plane pushes back from the gate. You care. You know, nobody wants to be in the airplane any longer than they have to be. So let's say the same thing.
So most of your customers will ask you to calculate different versions.
Yep.
Definition of the statement.
That's right.
So there is so the industry there's no one legal statement.
No, there isn't. And Medicare has all of its own rules that say, this is what we define everything as. And so for Medicare reporting, that has to meet that requirement. Every state has a Department of Health, and their rules may say, oh, well, whatever Medicare uses, we use too. Some states say, no, we're special, we use different rules. Well, now they got to calculate 2 different ways. And then every executive with the C at the front of their title is going to want their own calculation. So a lot of times I steer away from anything that's a calculated value, what I call a calculator and aggregate value, a balance, you know, how old are you, what's your age, how long did you stay? Like, I stay away from that because it's an endless stream of, that's what the analytical system is supposed to do.
What's the difference grouper and diagnosis grouper?
What is the grouper?
Yeah.
That's the DRG.
Oh, it's a DRG, okay.
Yeah. Diagnosis related grouper. And those are just to indicate that you could have 0, 1, or many. It's unusual to have many. You'll have a many grouper if you're an outpatient and you get what are called APCs instead of an MSDRG. Diagnoses, you can have 0 to many. Procedures, you can have 0 to many. Medical services, what team of doctors needs, if your doctor's not available, you know, were you here for an appendectomy, then your general surgery. If you're here for a heart attack, your cardiology.
How about if you have more than one medical service?
Oh, it's whichever ones take, whatever your primary problem is right now. And it can be changed during the visit. These are person-centric elements. In financial analysis, the encounter is primary and the person is secondary. It's kind of nice, you know, it's nice to know who you are, but I kind of don't really care who you are. I just care that you had a visit and how much it cost. If you're doing clinical analysis, the patient is primary. I care about who you are because you are a living being and you will have problems throughout your life and they may recur, and I'm very curious about that. Financial analysis, we don't care as much about that. We do, but not as much. So patients and guarantors are secondary. Guarantor is who's responsible for paying the bill. In adults, it's the same as the patient. These are some of the data elements on the insurance coverages. So any one encounter can have 0 to many insurances. It's not uncommon to call them primary, secondary, tertiary, and if you're curious, quaternary and quintary. Yeah. I just had to look that up just a few days ago. Since people can now have many, systems are getting more adaptable and that they can have, oh, well, you've got a lot of different insurances. And, oh, well, we thought it was this, but then we changed it. And so they moved around. So I've kind of gotten away from saying primary, secondary, tertiary, because we have to use these big words that nobody knows. So I just say the first insurance, the second insurance. That priority order is sometimes called the COB or COB, and that stands for Coordination of Benefits. That means that we're going to coordinate insurance benefit between the different insurances, because in just about every insurance policy of every type, everywhere, whether it's medical insurance or anything else, there's usually a clause somewhere in there that says, if the covered person is covered by more than one insurance policy, the benefit you will receive will never exceed the total amount payable by all the different insurances. So in other words, you can't get a $30,000 payout from insurance one and another $30,000 from two and another, no. That'll be reduced by the amount that any other insurance paid. That got instituted a long time ago. Don't ever expect to see that go away. These are some of the different terms. The member is the person who's receiving the care, such as you or your child. The subscriber is the person who enrolled in the insurance, which is just you because you're the one that has the job and gets the insurance from your employer that also covers your child. Eligibility uses electronic transactions called 270 and 271. It's usually just 271, I think. One is check the eligibility and the other is a response back. That response back will give the provider all the current information, what your deductible balance is, what your deductible is, what the balance currently is, what your copays are. That's how your doctor magically knows how much you're supposed to pay. Don't think that just because it's not on that card that they don't find out. They know. Yes?
So my area is cybersecurity. So in light of the breaches, the data breaches that that's being litigated, or at least they're it's in the news in terms of patient data in hospitals. What do you think is the cause of, other than the end user, maybe a nurse or a doctor forgetting to shut down for whatever log off or something? What do you think is generally the cause of the breaches? Security breaches? Yes.
I have no idea. So the question was, what are the typical causes of security breaches for data? And I couldn't possibly say. I'll tell you, if there were any two areas that you wanted to get into in healthcare that sound like they're going to be, a great expansion potential for you and earning potential, analytics and security. Those are the two. And usually need a background in data either way. Because it's going to involve a lot of analytics or a lot of working through data. Security is the other big aspect of healthcare that I don't cover. In fact, as far as I know, none of my clients use my data to do any security analysis. But if they were doing it, they wouldn't tell me. I have made some interfaces that feed security systems. Their data looks radically different than this.
Okay, because you have patient name and all the personal, the PIIs. So is your information or does your system encrypt that and then make some like de-identify? Oh, no. All of that data. So first of all, the question is does the data that my product extracts, does it encrypt it and does it de-identify the data? So the answer to both is no, because it doesn't have to be. The data is extracted and put into another system that stays inside the hospital's walls. In fact, it's in our policy that we don't ever send data outside. We won't send it. We'll tell the hospital what they can do with it, but it's their job to push the button to send it outside their walls. And of course, we don't pull it. Okay.
Yeah. I like to say I make a fuel pump that goes in a car and it takes the fuel from the gas tank and puts it in the engine, but it doesn't come through my network or anything to do that. And then we don't de-identify the data. We could do that, but it's completely legal to leave all of that information intact for operational purposes. That's allowed by HIPAA. Now, if it were going to go to a third party who didn't have an operational need for it, then yes, it would have to be de-identified, and we don't support that. The hospital would have to do that. And we're not going to get in the business of doing it either. Because one little mistake and you violated some giant rule, so no way.
You shape a violation. Oh, we get
No, right, yeah. My insurance wouldn't go up. Yeah, no, not touching that. Claims data, there's a lot of different data in a claim. You can kind of go head over heels with that. One of the really big, nice things about financial analytics is that what you hear the old adage, what gets measured gets done. Well, what gets paid gets done in healthcare. So claims are the way you get paid. And so claims data is often the place where regulatory changes happen, and why so many analytic systems will say, just give me your 837s. We'll start with that, because they're industry standard data. They have to be filled out to get paid, so you know the hospital is going to fill it out, and they're going to do their best job possible filling it out in order to get paid the most. So everybody's sort of playing by the same rules, so it makes a really good source of data. The downside is that claims don't contain everything that is of interest to us. Or sometimes the data is put into the claim for the purpose of maximizing reimbursement or accelerating it, which may not necessarily reflect the kind of thing that we're trying to measure. Like if we look at all of the diagnoses on claims and we say, well, wow, America's really sick. No, you just happen to, I happen to be 1 pound overweight, more than 1 pound overweight, but I happen to be 1 pound overweight. You better believe my doctor's putting obesity on that claim. Did we talk about obesity? Probably not, but it's going to be on there, along with hypertension, because I've always had hypertension. I take medication, it's treated. But if he puts 3 diagnoses on there, he could do a more advanced exam and get paid more. And that's legal. And he should, because I have those conditions. So I need that level of, looking at me. Does he do the same intensive level that he would on a brand new patient or somebody who had 5 conditions or 10? No, and it's not necessary. But I wouldn't look at claims to say, wow, well, 98%, according to claims, 98% of America's obese. I mean, I know it's high, but it's not that high.
But most of the literature, most of the research they do based on claims data to find out like, okay, how many percent in Tennessee, how many percent in South Carolina, in different states have obesity or have heart failure,
Yeah.
or in all kinds of disease or conditions. Because claims is the quote unquote the second best place.
Yeah.
To get data because it's so structured. And
Yes.
so, and easy to extract, and also it's pretty rich in the sense that you get all the patients, you get all these professional, you get institutional, almost like itemized. You know where they've gone. Like is it through the ED or is it like outpatient? So given that said, I think you're right. We have to be careful about using claims to project what is going on clinically.
Right, I agree. And claims,
may not be matched.
correct. Claims are also only filed on people who actually see the doctor and people who have insurance to be claimed upon. And also whatever the provider said they did, not necessarily what they actually got paid for, because the claim could be edited, it could be denied. So we kind of have to do a lot. We have to do more qualifications on those kinds of things, but I do think it's a good place to start. Any one data source, you have to say, well, what are we using this for? And sometimes your customers that are going to do that don't like to answer that question. That's not important. You don't need to do that. Just give me the something or other. Okay. Some of the things, and let's see, I think I've got, I'm almost near the end here. Yeah, I've got like 2 more slides. Some of the claims data elements on here are important. Carrier is the insurance company. And I looked that up a few years ago and I'm like, why are they called a carrier? An air carrier makes sense because they literally carry you to where you're going. That's how that word came to be. And an insurance company is called a carrier because they carry the risk of you as a beneficiary. That's why they're called carriers. Patient, whoever received the services. Facility, place of service says, was it a hospital, doctor's clinic, nursing home? What kind of environment was it received, provided? The dates of service are a very key thing. If you're doing charge analysis or claims analysis, date of service is the date you received whatever the thing is, whatever the chargeable thing is. In an inpatient stay, you'll have many dates of service. A common cause of denied claims is you had charges on there that had dates of service outside the admit and discharge date. Hey, you haven't got your facts straight, so no on everything. Groupers, talked about that. There's usually, I've only ever seen one per claim. But some of these systems are capable of storing more than one, like alternates. Rev codes, so all the charges on an inpatient, on a facility claim will be rolled up, that's a term you hear, rolled up by rev code. And a rev code's like a department. So like pharmacy, I think they've got 3 or 4 different, I think they've got 4 different rev codes. Laboratory has maybe like 10. So they're like the different departments. So all the charges within every chargeable thing is given a rev code when it's generated. So what actually goes on the claim, if we looked at a claim, you would not see line item billing. You would see only a total per rev code. Total laboratory, total pharmacy, total room and board, etc. And when you get your bill, that's what you will get. You are legally entitled to an itemized bill. Most hospitals don't send them because it costs more to mail because they're a lot thicker, there's a lot more paper. But you can get one, you are allowed to get it. And they have to be able to, you can look through it and go, wait a minute, there's a charge before I was admitted. Or you charged me for 3 x-rays in one day, why? You can go through and line item your bill. Insurance companies do the same thing, but they just roll it up. So they're kind of like the IRS. They just look at all the numbers on your tax return. They've got some ratios and they go, your numbers are close enough, so we trust you. You know, we're not going to come audit you. So insurance companies do the same thing, but they too can get an itemized bill if they want. They only do that when the encounter's like over $50,000 or $100,000. By the way, most average inpatient stays are somewhere between $6,000 and $10,000. That's the average total charges from the hospital. A HCPCS code, HCPCS, that represents some kind of item or service that the hospital rendered. The other kind is a CPT code or a procedure code, and that represents something service that a physician rendered. So CPTs are professional services, HCPCS are hospital. You'll only see HCPCS on our institutional claims, you'll only see CPTs on professional claims. There's a smidge of crossover, but it's not important.
Is it like nurses and all that? Are they professional or are they counted?
Nurses are not covered. All your room and board care is covered by is supposed to cover costs of nursing. But supply items, drugs, laboratory, all those are chargeable. X-rays, EKGs. If it's provided by somebody other than the nurse, essentially by a technician, that's usually chargeable.
So the nurse gives you aspirin, they can't charge you. Someone else gives you aspirin, they can charge you.
No, they charge you for the aspirin. They can't charge you for giving it to you. Yeah, administering it. Yeah. The last slide here is what I call taxonomies. And this is the last one. So these are the different terms that you may hear, like, I need the ICD-10 or the HCPCS or the CPT, this alphabet soup. What is it? This lists off all the different common ones you will hear. There are more, but these are the main ones. I think, did I put LOINC up there? Nope. Did I make a second slide? No. LOINC is another kind of code. That's one I wanted to put in there. That LOINC is for laboratory. The top row there are codes that are diagnosis codes. ICD-10, just ICD-10. 10 is the version. ICD is International Classification of Diseases. That is put out by the World Health Organization, a nonprofit, and it's public domain information. You can go download it. Medicare, CMS, takes ICD-10 and makes their own version called ICD-10-CM, clinical modification. That's what it stands for. So technically, Medicare claims have ICD-10-CMs, not ICD-10s, but they're the same. There's some modifications to it that they have, modifiers and that sort of thing. So it increases the list a bit. But for the most part, it's ICD-10. Anything that Medicare puts out, with a few exceptions, which I'm about to tell you, is public domain. You can get at ICD-10-CM. You can access it. You could put it in an Excel spreadsheet and play with it. Also, Aggregated Medicare claims data and about providers is also public domain. You can download that. You can go download how many you can download how much revenue Vanderbilt got last year and how much they spent in costs. You can't see by patient, but you can see by facility. You can see by DRG. You can do the same on individual physicians. So you could go pull your physician's data and see how much they got paid by Medicare last year. It's only Medicare, not commercial, but that is available. Here we go. Next are the DRGs. Those are groupers. So a DRG is determined by the collection of procedure codes and diagnosis codes together. So you've got many diagnoses, ICD-10, CMs, and you've got many procedures over here, CPTs, or HCPCS with a combination. Together, we come up with the DRG, which is one number. The list of DRGs is put out also by CMS, and that's called MS-DRG. That stands for, I think it's medical severity, something severity, diagnosis-related group. So that is what you put on a claim to Medicare. And commercial insurers can also use MS-DRGs, and we see some of that. One of the interesting things is Medicare is designed to serve population 65 and older. So you're not going to see a lot of 65-year-olds go in with a diagnosis of pregnancy. So what do you do for all those diagnosis codes or admissions for people under 65? So that has been solved by the company that originally made MS-DRG for CMS, the company called 3M. They don't make just Scotch tape and other stuff that we use at home. The little stick-up things don't peel the paint off. They also are in health technology. They make the software that does the coding for most hospitals. Figures out what the coding should be. They make a system called APR-DRG, and that's all patient revised diagnosis-related group. And that is meant to be DRGs across the life spectrum. There's others down here. Then we have procedure codes. These represent what was done to you or what was delivered. So it's chargeable amount. CDMs are an internal classification of charges within a hospital. That's like what they call their charge master. SNOMED CT. This was originally something that was just clinical terminology for, I think, pathologists or nurses. And then they created SNOMED CT, and basically they said, everybody in. So they took copies of everything, DRGs, ICD-10s, ICD-11s, like you name it, whatever it is, it went into CT. So SNOMED CT is like the master dictionary of it all. They said, we'll do it. And they said, we're gonna make a SNOMED CT term that covers the world, everything, every possible kind of code. And so that way EMRs could say, well, no matter what, there's a SNOMED CT term for it. And then they cross-reference back to these, and they have their own lists of clinical terminology. So when nurses document, all the documentation that goes in there is usually linked back to a SNOMED term somewhere. And finally, RVUs, you may hear that term that's used for physician productivity. That's where you assign a number to say, how much relative value did this physician generate as a result of doing this procedure? Yes, sir.
Is the grouping algorithm available somewhere? Or
Is the what?
grouping algorithm?
For DRGs?
Yes.
That's proprietary. Yeah.
That's what?
That is proprietary. So the question is it publicly accessible what the algorithm is for calculating what DRG should be based on the?
It's 3Ms.
Yeah. 3M's proprietary. And you don't have to use, if you're a hospital, you don't have to do it. You could just look at the chart, read through it, and say, I think the DRG should be blank, right? And if you will get occasional audits for Medicare, and they'll validate that you're doing that correctly. 3M says, we'll do it. We'll read the medical record for you and figure it out.
But it could be reverse engineered.
It could. I think it's like Google. You know, even if you did do that, it would change.
Another question I have, the DRG, is it associated with the price?
Yes.
And how often does this price evolve?
Once a year. That is, so DRGs, we'll easily get into a whole other line of conversation. DRGs are part of what's called the Prospective Payment System, or PPS. That's confusing because when you say prospective, you think, oh, before you come into the hospital, they're going to figure out how much they're going to get paid. That is not what it means. Prospective payment system means that Medicare will say, and I think it's October 1. Yeah, October 1 is when DRG is going to affect. It's not the calendar year.
CMS.
Yeah, CMS calendar. So coming up, this October 1 will be the 2020 DRG rates. And they will publish that, and all the hospitals will find out probably like 10 days before October 1st how much they're going to get paid, right? And that is calculated based on, they set a base rate for everybody, and then they've got variable factors like where are you located, what's your labor rates, are you in Alaska where we need to provide care and it's going to cost more. They do some adjustments, but everybody gets the same base rate across the U.S. Those amounts are based on what are called the Medicare cost reports that are submitted by hospitals this year, actually 2 years ago. So they take the 2018 data, so FY 2018, submit the cost reports in 19. Medicare crunches that, CMS crunches that and says, based on this data, we project that we will pay this much in 2020 based on what happened in 18. That's why it's called prospective, is because they take what happened in the past and they prospect what they will pay into the future. So DRG amounts are actually based on what happened 2 years ago. And that rolls forward every year.
I think they trend forward.
They do. They do whatever it is they do. And then the lawmakers get involved. Everybody gets screwed. And I think the federal government does the same thing, as they go, well, here's how much money Medicare is going to have available to it. Here's how much services we think the population is going to use in that year. So, and then divide the pot. Because when was the last time the Medicare tax rate went up? Well, Obama, when they signed Obamacare, they added 0.6 or 0.45 to, I don't know, something to top wage earners over like 400,000.
So that APR, DRG also updated yearly?
Which one, APR, DRG?
APR, DRG, second stream.
Yeah, actually, I think they update a little more often than that. So to get APR, DRGs, so let's say you're a hospital and you go to submit a claim to an insurance company and they say, we require you to submit APR, DRGs. You as a hospital have to then go pay 3M for the license to use APR, DRGs. And that's a unique thing about MSDRGs, is although technically MSDRGs are public domain, they're licensed by 3M. They're just licensed to all the institutions in the United States. CPT is a particularly big example of that. Is CPT is created by the American Medical Association, the association that represents physicians in the United States. Interestingly, only maybe like 30-some-odd% of physicians are actual members of AMA. So the AMA says, and I'm trying not to get political here, AMA says, we will say what physicians do. We will create all the codes and say, this is the procedure they can do. This is what we call it. We're going to give it a code. Here you go. And then Medicare says, okay, great, AMA, why don't you give us that? And then we'll base our reimbursement rates on it. And they go, sounds like a plan to us. And that is how the physician fee schedule is set. If you're a physician and you want to submit claims, or you're a hospital and you want to submit claims, you have to go pay AMA for a license to use CPT codes to submit claims to get paid. CPT codes are not public domain. But CPT, I think CPT is part of HCPCS. So if you download HCPCS, you will get the CPT. I think you get CPT as part of that.
HCPCS built on CPT.
CPT is part of HCPCS, right? Mm-hmm. It's like part 2 or 3 or something.
HCPCS is more on CPT. CPT
is within.
And then you have more.
Yes.
That CMS add on to it, and then add more details on the price.
Correct. Yeah. And you're not allowed to use it for, technically you're not allowed to use it for whatever purposes, but it's out there, you can get to it. So that's why I list the organizations to say who is responsible. And Medicare says, hey, whatever you say, that's what we're going to go with. You have an obligation to the public health at large. And they go, we got it.
Is that possible large hospitals use their own code?
No.
You won't get reimbursement.
You won't get reimbursed? Yeah, you can.
Code, you can use your
Yeah.
you won't get paid. Because it is required by CMS that you have to use this code.
I joke that somebody says, what does your data extraction engine have? I go, everything tied to a $sign. But interestingly, there's no $sign anywhere in any of the data.
In different hospitals have different care quality. Like a hospital has a higher quality, they will charge more. So now you provide the same code.
Does not exist. There's pay for performance and all kinds of other things that you can get a little more reimbursement for, but no, it's not like one doctor charges 100 and another charges 250 for the same office visit. There's not that kind of price differential. It's like 100 versus 105 or 10. Yeah, if you want to get rich, don't be a doctor. That's what I would tell you. Or be a hospital. Get into that business, that ring that's around it, the for-profit industry. This is more stuff, claims, some of the terms that they're known by. Part A, UB04, UB92 is the older version. Remittances, here's some of the terms that you see for that. An ERA is an electronic remittance advice that says, here's how much we paid you and on which claims. We don't get ERAs, only providers get ERAs. But we get EOBs as beneficiaries, and so do the hospitals. But the hospitals usually don't look at the EOB unless it's a denial. They're only looking at the ERA. Oh, we got paid how much? That's all they really care about. These are the major vendors of systems that you'll extract data from or get them from. Those are terms you can learn. Epic has probably 40% of the market. Cerner has another 30%, and then everybody else is on their way out. All right, this is the last slide. And I worked in IT before, and now I like to say I work in data. I try not to be the IT guy anymore. And it's tempting to follow technology first. But when you start getting into data and analytics, you have to start asking yourself about like the business questions. What is the problem we're trying to solve? What is the opportunity we want to, for lack of a better word, exploit or take advantage of? And that is not technology. Technology is a tool that can get you there, but technology doesn't create the opportunities, doesn't get you to the solutions. So ask yourself what the problem is or where you're trying to go, and then pick the technology that will get you there. There's a saying in business, small businesses, we only hire when it hurts. That means we have to really be hurting for a person before we create an FTE. Otherwise, we create a role and then we don't really know quite what they're there for. And trust me, hiring that person ain't going to solve it. They're just going to be even more confused. So the same is true when it comes to technology. I say create the process first. And then once you can't keep up with doing it repeatedly over and over and over again, or you're getting mistakes because it's too onerous, then it's time for technology. Don't leave with technology. The technology vendors will tell you that you need to lead with technology. Don't do that. I don't go to HIMSS anymore, just to give you an idea of that. I would rather go to HFMA or, what are the analysts doing? What are the business people doing with the data? And then I'll figure out what the technology is supposed to be.
Can you talk a little bit about Cerner?
About Cerner?
Yeah.
What would you like to know about Cerner?
Anything, just.
Well, I tell you what, let me wrap up and then I'll tell you any more you want because I'm like 45 minutes over. So anybody have any other questions I can answer?
What's the total data volume on the rate business?
What is the total what?
Data volume, so I mean per month or per day transactions. How
The-
much volume do you expect?
That can,
What is the transaction?
it's like three-dimensional. Are you talking about our engine or are you talking about like claims?
You're right.
Yeah, that's like multi-dimensional. For one client, it could be small because they only want a very isolated set of data. And then others will say, give us everything. And as soon as you have more data, give us that too. So it would be like saying how much volume of air is moving through outside at any one time. It's kind of like, well, it depends on the wind. But in general, it's all discrete data. So no multimedia type, no video that would just like make it ridiculously large. What's that?
Really structured.
Yes, it's all modeled. None of it is unmodeled or unstructured data. And we're probably moving 200 to 800 meg a night, almost a gig in some hospitals. And that's every night. It doesn't sound like much, but when you consider that it's all numbers and letters, there's no narrative notes in that. That's all just claims data, male, female, date of birth, social security numbers, charges. Charges make up the overwhelming volume. Half of the volume moves every day is charges. And we're moving what we call full replace. So when we extract an encounter, so the encounter is the fundamental unit. If there's any one change anywhere in that encounter, the whole encounter comes again. So if you've been in the hospital for 2 months, you had a 2-month admission, you're going to be a big, what I call a fat encounter, and that encounter is going to get pulled for at least a year every single day because stuff's happening to it well after discharge.
So many transactions that you get from the same patient. So many.
Yeah.
So how does an HCO, like an organization, try to do their earnings, right? How do they measure their earnings? There's so many transactions, kind of like, not closed transactions, pretty much it's open exploring.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know which transaction is going to be screwed, and still things are hanging around, right? So how do they really do kind of an earnings call and meet their financial targets?
So the question is how does a hospital calculate their earnings? First, they don't have earnings calls. That's very close to the vest at hospitals, because there's a lot of hospitals like an airport. It's not there really to make. It didn't say, oh, let's start a hospital business and we'll go into business for ourselves. It's more like a community needed a hospital, and then all these other players come in and operate there and do their business. So hospitals kind of, in a sense, passive to that. And if they reveal too much of their financial information and their operations, then those players might take advantage of that because they're businesses too. So hospitals tend to keep that information close to the vest. In terms of calculating what the earnings are, unless you're a for-profit hospital, technically you don't have earnings. You just have, what's left over, or they don't have equity. But it's all financial terms. It's the same thing for business. Yeah, they have costs. What they're going to do is they're going to take whoever's discharged and the services provided, and then capture and then subtract, take the amount earned from that or reimbursed, and subtract all that out. Now, hospitals, unlike a lot of businesses, many of them have very large, what's the right term? Not endowment, trusts. They might move. I'm trying to think of an example, and this isn't. I've got one client that might be, say, 400 beds will do, or 500 beds will do $1 billion a year in their annual budget. That's what they might move. And of course, they only get 30 cents on the dollar of that. So, but they might have a trust that's another $1 billion. So then they're just, they've paid off everything. They're there to continue to keep the lights on. So they don't need to make earnings to then pay off investors or pay off the original investment capital, because that's been done. Does that make sense? It's kind of like it's more like a government.
Okay.
Only it's not like the U.S. government, which is an enormous deficit.
And I think we are almost coming to the end of the closing. And if you have any questions, feel free, to contact Jason. And thank you for Jason tonight and give us a very big learning here. Yeah, I learned a lot too myself, even though I spent a lot of time working on the claims data. Yeah. So
thank you.
We will. I believe that we will have the PowerPoint on the website too. We'll send me the file and then we'll load it up there. So keep an eye on it, and then we'll have it loaded maybe in the next 2 days. Yeah. If you have any question, feel free to contact Jason. And so thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, I hope to see you next time.